Kahn?
Get the chance.
You have the address. Just send the location.
I said it this week. Monday night I said it. I said it over the last time I said it this week. Yes, yes, it was ready. Yeah, set him in the middle. Set him in the middle.
I mean, I know.
Oh, talk to him.
You know what we want? You know these humbugs, come on.
How do you even guess it?
Come on.
Pretty much 3-4, you got 3-4. And no, you're behind
Huh? Maimonides? I'm assuming.
Why do you have
Right, you're not gonna get this. Let me go back to far.
How about your recorder coming down? Huh? Gotta get a little crazy. Like you recorded it?
It's good, it's good. Yeah, it's very powerful. It's powerful.
And these are the next job.
So who's doing the intro?
Yeah?
Who's doing it?
Somebody to introduce.
What?
Somebody to introduce.
So Rabbi Levine will take care of it.
You need somebody to.
Let's take care of it.
Do it.
Rabbi Kahn said, yeah, it's him. Yeah, it's him. Yeah, for sure. He knows the piece.
That's right, spring.
Steaming is right.
I couldn't find it when I was going there.
Can I both say? The Rav, Rabbi Silman, is away this Shabbos. He asked me to be his shliach to welcome and introduce HaRav, Aharon Kahn Shlita, Yeshiva, Shiur Aveda Yitzchak and Chanan, a Morda Asra, Knesset Space Avigdor, an Adam Gadol, Adam Choshev, Adam Gadol, and HaKohen HaGadol Me'echav.
Rabbi Levine.
It's a big zechus.
Where's your section? Shabbos was my shoes.
So we want to, the Shiur should be for HaRav Garber. Oh, HaRav Garber. My grandfather was very close to HaRav Garber. May the Shiur be a zechus, naliyas, neshama.
Brothers.
Without further ado, Kahn Shlita, please.
So this kind of mokum is good for a person who knows everything about pet. Baruch Hashem.
Wouldn't even any scar?
No. Okay. So it's like this. Normally, cotton at the end of Daf Chav Beis is clearly speaking about a Chacham Shemeis. Because the Gemara starts out, Tana Rabbanon, Chacham Shemeis, is Beis Medrash Batel. And the Gemara has a sequence of Gadlus, Abezin Shemeis, Nasi Shemeis, and the different halachas that have to do with the Yesod of Beis Medrash Batel. At the very end of that Gemara, turning to Amud, the next Amud, Chav Gimel Amud Aleph, Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha Aimer v'chulu, ve'ein oimrim shmua v'agoda bebeis hava. You're not supposed what shmua is and what agoda is. Genoi shmua maybe is halacha, agoda is kamashmoi. It means any limud haTorah. Ein oimrim shmua v'agoda bebeis ha'avel. Which avel are we talking about? And was heißt beis ha'avel? Amar Lav al Rab Chananya ben Gamliel, sagt die Gemara weiter, haya oimer shmua v'agoda bebeis ha'avel. Normally when you have a machloikas, you have two man da'amrim, and it says, Rabbi Yehuda oimer, Rabbi Yochanan oimer, v'chulei v'chulei. Here it says, Amu olav a ma'aser Rav. You know, it isn't a machloikas, each one is cholik in the base medrash. They said that he in fact was shahaya oimer shmua v'agoda bebeis ha'avel. Is azay. This last line, Amulav Rav Chananya ben Gamliel. So ich persönlich weiß nicht. I'm not bekannt with Chananya ben Gamliel. I didn't have a chance to look at the Sforim, say the Adolis or whatever. Very das given. But it would be mashma to me l'cha'ira that it's not talking about not in the house of the Av Bezdin or of the Nasi, Pashut, Beis Havel, any Havel. Sai mitzad that it's a story by Alma. Sai mitzad that I don't know about Chananya ben Gamliel, that Tafke should be talking about that he visited them, and if he would have visited them, his stomach would have said Maisa Shahaya a little bit more elaborately. I was able to gemeint. None of this is any hachacha to anything really. But it's a gut feeling as Evim is hooked. Me'idoch Gisa, it's one hemshech. And the hemshech clearly is talking about Beis Medrasha of a Chacham, or Av Bezdin, or of a Nasi. So you could say that Eimim and Shmuv Agoda B'Beis Havel refers dafka to them. It's interessant, I wrote down, there was a Rav that it was in Tel Aviv who was born in Teiman, in Yemen. But schreibt da so, steht sich, the Teimanim all follow the Rambam almost to a foot. Was sagt der Rambam? Before we get to this, Sholem Yitzchak Halevi, who lived, was in Teiman, he went to Eretz Yisrael, I think he died in 1953 or something like that, and he was a Rav in Tel Aviv, from the Sfardim, from the Teimanim. But what does the Rambam say? The Rambam's Lashon is not noigeya to a Chacham or a Bezdin or a Nasi. The Rambam begins to tell you the halachas of a Bezdin and Nasi and Chacham in the Perek Tes, halacha Yudalit, Tes Vav, v'chulei v'chulei. And this halacha, he doesn't connect to that at all. In fact, he brings this halacha much later in Perek Yud Gimel of Hilchos Avil. And he writes, Poshet, Einoim lim shmua v'hagoda b'beis ha'avel, ele yoshvim dovin. Of course, it's mashma one of two things. Either that we're talking la'afuke stam mili da alma, and we would have had to have him, but from deswegen reden and lernen is serious, so that you're allowed to do. Kamashma lo no yoshvim dovin, or lehefech, that we would have thought that Shmuv Agodah is Pekudah Hashem Yisholem Misamche Leiv, and therefore it's not, but things that are Mili Da'alma are not Misameach. So the Rambam is Moisef El Yoshvim David. They have to sit Devuye Leiv, Tikolev Davoi. V'chein Einoimrim B'fnei HaMeis El Advorim Shal Meis, Avolasik B'divrei Torah B'fonav of Beis HaKvoros Osel. You see very clearly that the Rambam is speaking in general, and the Rambam says, the Rambam is also very clearly not speaking about the Ovel himself. The Rambam is not speaking about the Ovel. And when it says Beveis Ha'ovel, he doesn't mean in the presence of the Ovel. So even if the Ovel goes out, or is not there for whatever reason, the fact that it's in Beis Ha'ovel is enough of a reason to be Yoshvin Dvuyim and Einoim Shmuv Ha'agodah. What is the hoichacha for that? We'll soon see. But that's l'chayr what's mashma, because the Rambam doesn't say ein oimrim shmua v'agoda lifnei ha'avel like he says ein oimrim b'fnei ha'meis. So and the avel himself is certainly also in divrei Torah, and the Rambam already told us much earlier that because of it's a shayla pekudah Hashem Yisholem Misamcha because of Eoneg Doim. But whatever, that's a shiur b'fnei atzmai. But whatever the Isur is, the Avel is not allowed to learn Divrei Torah, and then the question is, Dvarim Arayim, v'chulei, 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 halachas, and Hilchos Avel. But when it says, Einam Shmuah, v'chein ein oimlim b'fnei ha-meis al Dvarim shal meis, it's masma that Einam Shmuah v'agod is dav, not b'fnei ha'avel, because it was said, b'fnei lifnei ha'avel, or im ha'avel, or whatever. Yeah, so what does he say? So he says, "B'dvar hadroshes b'veis ha'avel." This is a Shalos Tshuvos called Divrei Chachomim that they put together from this Reb Sholem Yitzchak Halevi, who originally from Teiman. Ivra, ki amiras droshes agodos ha'mishnayis b'veis ha'avel l'chorah nira da'asam me'od ha'kosav ha'Rambam perek Yud Gimel Lochates Milchus Avelis ha'tur v'ashulchan aruch yoredei siman she'neches ha'chazayin. Is that l'shona? Ein oimrim shmuv v'agoda b'veis ha'avel ha'yoshvin dvuyim. Who migemor b'mait katan chav gimel the tama in ein shoymim shmuv v'agoda b'veis ha'avel. Amru lo v'Chananya ben Gamliel shoyoyim shmuv v'agoda b'veis ha'avel ad kan. Mikol makom yesh al Sugyos machlokes. Ayin beis Yosef tu yoredei siman shin daled mem. They didn't want to write shin mem daled because it's the word shmad. Baruch hashulchan siman sif ches tes, which I'll quote to you soon. Yeah, but the Samcha Aluv that Reb Chananya ben Gamliel shoyoyim shmuv v'agoda b'veis ha'avel mitama klal. What klal is he talking about? Halacha kedivrei hamekel ba'avil, which itself is a tremendous question. So the steht doch beferish in the Gemara these two man the Amrim. So Amru Olav Reb Chananya weist ois the Rambam felt that that's not called divrei hamekel. Because of a kind of a Ma'aser Rav is not enough to say that it's kedivrei hamekel, because it's not clear whether they're saying he did right or he did wrong. I think Mistama, that's how the Rambam learned, because otherwise, since the halacha is kedivrei hamekel, and if it would be a regular machlokas, we should pass that you're allowed to say shmu v'agoda b'veis havel. So the Amru Olav says they didn't teach that way. Is memela, and the Shulchan Aruch paskins exactly like the Rambam. So he says, but nevertheless, there is such an approach, and you'll soon see that in an Arichus, where he quotes just about every sefer that's negea to the Indian on earth. Who is that, of course? Chacham Ovadia Yosef. So you'll see in there that he brings this idea up a number of times. But in Anfals, that's how he writes. I was a number of years ago in Beis Havel amongst the Sfardim, and you have a whole bunch of Chachomim, and they're all doing all kinds of things in the Beis Havel, like this. They learn a lot of Zoya v'chulei. Kind of how do you say Shlita? Heligdal v'simach Tes of Yeridea. Shenoise v'noisim b'dvar Yishuv haminug v'hela leheter kemavur sham ba'arucha ayinoid. V'zen neged das HaRambam Memoran HaShulchan Aruch. Neged das HaRambam Memoran HaShulchan Aruch. It's unusual that something that is so mefurish in the Rambam and in the Mechaber that there should be. Derech Agav Rav Soloveitchik, Zechonu Levracha, L'chai Olam Haba, was very makpid on this inyan not to say a Dvar Shmua B'veis HaAvel, even if the Avel is not there. And there was no learning of Mishnayos v'chulei v'chulei, and many of the Talmidim that follow his minhagim, they do the same. When people ask me to say Mishnayos or whatever it is, sometimes between Mincha and Ma'ariv, so I'm always mesupik what to do. So I made it my business to come at a different time. So but he writes here, but this is what he writes, and he writes it in another place as well, the same word. He has a Shuvas in Arachayim and Shuvas in Yeridea, this Rav Shalom Yitzchak Halevi from Taimon, and he says the same thing. Is Azoi. There is a possibility, which the Beis Yosef brings, that this inyan is talking about Dafka in the Beis Hanosi, and that's mistama because of the Hemshech Hadvarim that we have in the Gemara. The Abi Aimer in Chelik Dalid of the Abi Aimer Yogadea Simon Chav Tes Amadati v'ez boinin b'dova mashanoigim lidrish b'divrei Torah v'agodah b'veis ha'avel v'yesh shalomdim sham mishnayos in Pirush HaRav le'ilu nishmas hanifta v'zeh b'nigut l'mashe posak HaRambam hilchos Avel perek Yud Gimel halacha Tes ein omrim shmua v'agodah b'veis ha'avel al yoshvin dovin v'chein b'tur Shulchan Aruch siman shinai chesed zayin ein omrim shmua v'agodah b'veis ha'avel al yoshvim v'doimimim. They touch dovim doimimim. They remain silent. Yeah. So he quotes the Gemara Ma'id Cotton, Amulav Rab Chananya, L'choil Fimad Kaimel and Lochak Divrei Ameiko Ba'avel, Afilu B'yochid Nega Rabim, Hayol Lifsay Kahn Kerab Chananya ben Gamliel, Ubefrat the Ovid Uvda Benavshay. He learns V'kaimel and Ma'aser Rav. Gemara Shabbos Daf Chaf Aleph says that's Ma'aser Rav. So he learns that this is an Indian of Ma'aser Rav. And they bring in a Raya or a Chocha, is the Chluchayra that it slugs up the first Mandiyama, and why doesn't the Rambam paskin lekula? He writes, yeah, ve'ein loim b'da dafka echad the Gemara by sekas behedya ka'yochid b'makam rabim kaimelon kavosei. Aval ein loim ha'keim b'datenu shalei mevuab talmid rabbeinu yonah b'zeh haloshin, and he quotes le'inyam psak oima moiri harav she'ein halocha k'tanakama da'osal. This is the Isur the Oinim b'tashmi shamita on Shabbos. That's the topic. Elakab and Gamliel. V'chai b'chol ha'mitzvahs hamulas b'torah afilu b'mitzvahs aina. V'chein b'Yerushalmi potzke b'ferish k'moise v'chi teimel loy nochosh la'Yerushalmi Kivan shanu roim sheshas shalonu cholken olav rabbanon. The kaimel yochid rab malach rabbanon. V'lo naniach talmud or shabiyadenu lismach al Yerushalmi zoyin akusha. Mipnei shezeh apsak gam ken b'chol hatalmud shalonu da'aloch l'kdivra hamekel ba'avel. His bekitza based on this idea of halacha l'kdivra hamekel ba'avel, which he goes into even more ba'arichus for quite a while. He holds, even b'malkam rabim v'chulei v'chulei, and he says memela pashtus. We should have pasken like Rav Chananya ben Gamliel, and how come we pasken l'chumra einam shmu v'agodah b'veis havel? So he says be'emes ra'inu b'chidush Rashash. If you look in the back of the Gemara, Taka, the Rashash and this Gemara Chav Gimel, shekasav einam shmu v'agodah b'veis havel v'chein pasuk aram ha'tur shulchan aruch l'choyra havel lipsel Rav Chananya ben Gamliel, says the Rashash, halacha g'divra hamekel ba'avel v'gam ma'aser Rav. They bring it. So Pashtus, it sounds like they would paskin like it. So he quotes now the Rashash that the Torah Sa'adam, the Ramban, in his Sefer Anavelus, so he taka connects those two ketoyim of the Gemara, which be'etzem is one long hemshech. And it's mashra from the Gemara, even though the Lashon B'veis Havel doesn't mention not the Nasi, not the Chacham, v'chulei, v'chulei. That's the problem. There's a tension. On the one hand, it's like what's it called, a run-on sentence. And on the other hand, the signain is different. So it's hard to know. But he says that the Ramban tainas that this din of Ein Oimrim B'veis Havel is not any Beis Havel. And he writes, this is the Lashon. Toras ha'adam matzasi shemefarish dekoy areisha achocham va'av bezdin v'nosi shemeis shebotei medrash batal. Each one has one madrega worse than the other. But that's exactly the point. It doesn't say beveis medrash shel ha'avel. So this is the quotation that he has from the Rashash. And he writes, "V'yosinir sheikas michosur shel Rashash from Kaimel and Ma'aser Rav, v'shuv ra'isi b'sefer Eshkol v'chulei v'chulei agansa arichus." And he says that the nigel is feel like havased alocha k'miva amekel v'chulei v'utani b'sefer Rashash v'sefer Eshkol atzmei paras b'sakina charifa shein oimen shmu agodah b'veis ha'avel v'nachal Eshkol sham heyo da'arifa rosh mevi'in sefer debraisa omu al Chananya ben Gamliel shoyim b'shmu v'agodah b'veis havel at Kahn nirad kavanosei k'divrei Rashash hanal, that we should paskin otherwise because divrei hamekel ba'avel. So this is the whole hemshech. He goes into this nekuda. Now he quotes a little bit later. Lo yachachid k'akati lo ifrak michulsha ki b'beis Yosef in Siman Shin Dalid Mem. Hevi divrei Rambam b'Torah Sa'adam dehod ein omer shmur v'agodah b'veis havel v'Rab Chananya ben Gamliel choyle b'Shabbos Mayri the L'Tana Kama afal pi she'ein avelus b'Shabbos ein oiskin shom b'Torah aval im bo lahem ma'aseh moirim be'isuv heter shaloi u'be'evel rabosi toni lohachi ein oimim lo Torah v'lo medrash lo hagodah b'veis hamedrash mipnei she'b'Yehuda noisnim shalom b'knisas and tziyason v'lamdocha she'ein avelus b'Shabbos. So he says that the din of Ein Avelus B'Shabbos does not apply in the positive, that you should be Oisik B'Torah. That din of Ein Avelus B'Shabbos, the Nihuge Avelus, so the Isur of Aistois, it's interesting discussion in its own right. Why is Divrei Torah different? And of course, it's the whole question of the Rabbeinu Tam took the Aliyah, because otherwise it would be Avelus B'Fahesia, mashma that if it wasn't a question of Tzibur, it would be an Isur of Talmud Torah. So why is that different? So we can mechalik sein. But Bekitza, the Untershtu Shura is that there's 3 days here. One day is that Taka Einoimim Hagodah B'Veis Ha'avel, means any Beis Ha'avel, and you have the Kasha, what about the Divrei HaMekel Ba'avel? Second question is, the second mahalach is that Einam Divrei Hagodah does not mean any Beis Ha'avel. It's a halacha in the Miut Limud HaTorah mitzad the godless of the Marbitz Torah of Chacham, of Bezdin V'Nasi, so there are all kinds of restrictions which show that he's gone, and we can't learn anymore from him. So in the Beis HaAvel, we also have that restriction, but it doesn't apply to a regular Avel, Bar Minan. And the third possibility is that it's talking about something else. It's talking about Avelus B'Shabbos in Gansen, and that even B'Beis HaAvel on Shabbos, you cannot say a Shmua V'Agoda, even though B'Tzibur you can. Yet. So, the Masachet Moches, Sof Perek Yud, which of course the Abi Omer quotes as well, he says that the Girsa is as follows. Chacham Shemeis v'chula abesin Shemeis, Nosi Shemeis, kol batei medrashas b'teilim, v'loi meteilim b'shuk, elo yoshvim v'doimin, ein oimrim loi halocha v'loi agoda b'beis medrasha shel Avel. It's not b'veisa shel Avel, but b'beis medrasha shel Avel. So unless he's talking about a gvir who has his own personal beis medrash v'chulei, obviously he's saying that it's a whole hemshach hadvarim, and also there's no hefsek here. It's all one continuum. And then it says, Tzarich lishol maschilin b'holchas avelum v'poshim li'inyonim achelim v'chayzim b'holchas avelum. So that's a separate halacha, what you're allowed to learn, what you're not allowed to learn. Ad Kahn. Because of a Ramban, the Lefizeh Loshen Beis Medrasha Shlova Hainu Batei Medrashas HaBetelim Mishum Avelus. V'arei Shakoi the Katoni v'Chochem v'Abezdin v'Nosi Batei Medrashas Betelim Ad Kahn. V'chein Kosav Aritva in Moed Kotten itself Daf Chav Beis Amud Beis. It's all one Hebshach, and he says the Ritzgeis is also like that. Shehevi Divra Abaisel Chochem Abad v'Nosi Shemeis v'Kosav Oid v'Eino Mishum v'Agoda b'Beis Avel. By him, it's a hemshach hadvarim for sure. V'omer Rav Natronoi hutzach loimer shenichnosim lebeis hakneses v'shomer kol medrashas betelim. V'leisek adaita shebetelim min atfilo melikha b'Torah, that the tefillah, of course, you're not bottle, and the learning Torah b'tzibur you're not bottle either. That's a kriyas HaTorah you do, but the learning itself, the limud HaTorah in the beis medrash is bottle. This is obviously talking about the batei medrashas of these chachomim, chacham nasi, bezdin v'nasi. Ukedivrei Ramban. Now he quotes the Aruch HaShulchan. So the Aruch HaShulchan, it's interesting. He's very, he's distressed. He's upset. Schreibt azoi. I brought with me the Lashon of the Aruch HaShulchan. He has a shtickle arichus on this inyan, and based on our minhag and how it is that we have this minhag, and basically he says that some of the things that we already said before. Siman Shenai Chesif Ches and Tes. Einam im Shmu v'Agoda b'Beis HaAvel Yoshvim v'Doimim Keinu b'Tur v'Shulchan Sim Siv Zayin Keinu b'Gemor Chav Gimel Amud Aleph V'Yisa Shom Omelav of Chananya ben Gamliel Shoim Shmu v'Agoda b'Beis HaAvel Ein Shom. V'Posku Ketana Kamo Shmua He Sugyo. First of all, what's to know what is Shmua? He Sugyo the Koldover she'Einoi me'inyan Avelus Ein Lilmud b'Beis HaAvel L'fi Zeh Yesh Litmoy Al Min Agenu Shekama Loim de Mishnayis b'Beis HaAvel v'Gam Gemara loim deman shechevla shas kishameis hoya mehachevla. It was an interesting minute that the chevra shas, the daf yomi, right? So the whatever they were learning, that was their daf yomi of today. So the chevra shas that he was part of, they go to his house and they are learning. It doesn't even say where he is, But he writes, yesh l'tmayal min agenu shekama loim dem and anshe chevra shas kishameis hoya mehachevla levad ze ein shum tam loma lo yilmedu acherim beveis havel. If he's not learning, that's what the Modu Acherim. He's not learning, Stami's not learning with them altogether. But it's done in his house. Well, Anias 19 near that. So the first thing he brings down is Lahedya Mismachus Tov Perek Yud, the Zakoy Al Chochem Shemeis, the Beis Medrasha bottle. And he quotes the whole Arichus, Maschilin b'chus avelu v'chulu v'sayim b'chus avelu v'chananya ben Gamliel v'chulu ad kan l'shoyin ha'arei lahedya the ma'irinon shezeu beis hamedrash shel ha'avel v'hainu sheshoylin kan she'elois u'bezeu asif shaper kadei shlo yasif chadaita me'avelus ta'kol chayovim b'chvoidoi. So there shouldn't be masiach daita from the avelus of the nasi or the chacham b'chulei, so therefore you're not allowed to. I always felt that it's more than that it's, you have to show that he's gone. Yeah, but this is what he says. And then he writes, a bissel weiter. V'chein mevur mariv shekosat zal chochem shemeis v'abeis Yosef b'shim shim daled mem the Meiri b'dinim elu hevi mer Ramban shekosat Tanya enel memshua b'Shabbos kama afal pi shein avelus b'Shabbos ein oiskim shom b'Torah avlim bolahem ma'isa moirin ve'evel rabosi Tanya beis medrasha shalavel hainu batu medrashas ab'telim machmas avelus v'areisha kois. So the Ramban gives two of those possibilities, and the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch gave the third, that it's stam beis ha'avel. That's where we're holding. V'zo mamish kidvarenu, he writes, avol ba'avelim da alma di cholim achelim lilmoid u'ma'oit mihani al Shulchan Aruch v'achonim shesosm devreim avol adina nirli bo k'mo shekasavna v'chen yeshlema divrei HaRambam seg perek yud gimel. I don't see how it's possible to say that in the Rambam. All right, but as they zokta. So we don't know. The
Abiyah Omer says this?
No, this is all in the Aruch HaShulchan, which the Abiyah Omer was kind enough also to bring down, as does the Teimani Rav that I mentioned before. Yeah, then he writes like this. Yeah. V'tabei deinai l'goyin l'Rabbi Yosef Chaim b'shas ha'tshuvas Rav Polim chele gimel sheyoshav gam ken al meducha zu. Because of this whole shaila that people do differently than the way the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch paskin. That the kaimel shulchan shenai ches she'emim shmu v'agodel v'eisa'avel al yoshim v'doimimim. Aminat poshet v'yadu sh'loim dem shmu v'agodel meduchas hanifta v'chein amad davar. U'muchach tesfila shekol kavanosam le'ili nishmas hanifta l'nuchasa yeich shash b'zeh klal. Nemtzenu l'meidim oid smuchim l'minagenu shohel v'oisim kein le'ili nishmas hamonech hanifta b'chei agavna shap edomi loim shmu v'agodel. יש לו ויראי לזה, גבי חזקי מלך מיהודה, כובד אסלוי במויסוי, וגמרם בו בכמה תזיין, שהישיבה ישיבה על קברי, וכל סבב נבקה יוסף, שהישיבה ישיבה של חכומים לעשי בתור ראשון. ואף אגב דתנו, לא יהלך אדם בבייס הקורס תפילין בראשי, because לא יגלה ראש, right? So he can't be קורא בהם ומספל בהם. היינו היכא דוד לנבשי כאדם הקורא בתורה, אבל היכא דוד לייקא דשכבה, כגויים בדי ישיבה שעושים כבוד רבם, לקם משום לא יגלה ראש. That's the Ramah, and that's Sugya. That's all a quotation from the Nimukei Yosef. The Ramah says because it's the covet of the Yikod Shechviv, covet of Nifter, and the Rosh says as long as you're B'richuk Dalet Amos. The Tanim Sanil Ramah, who Rabbeinu Delim Gash, in Tshuva Mem Zayin, that he writes, Sh'al Tod Ramina Nom Ifnei Ames Yodov Shemezu Kimlan Milu Divrei Torah, Kasheloch, how could there be a Yeshiva al Kivrei if you're not allowed to learn because like Larosh? It's very dramatic. It's like Yaakov Avinu loy meis, you know, it's still going on. So Shiva al Kivrei. So that, he says, is not a problem of lo yigla rosh. Shekivan shadova yadua shekavod gadol yesh lo bekach ein ze mishum lo yigla rosh. V'hida ein loimim lifnei ha-meis al dvav shal meis v'kimda b'divrei Torah she'oiskim bat divrei Torah b'fonav ein miskaven lesses like kavod ela lasik b'divrei Torah lahanos atzmam hu shemiskavenim. Inami ikalukma be'echad ha-shnayim shemisaskim b'fonav divrei Torah she'kavod eino ela b'shavas yeshiva al Kivrei. But one or two people is Nehestnishken Yeshiva. You know, there's a lot to say about that comment, but we'll leave it out. So in other words, if there is such a thing, and he had a yeshiva, and only one or two people show up, so that's certainly not a covet for him, that they're continuing his Torah and his traditions. So he says, if there's one or two people, then even if there's a thought to make it like a yeshiva, it wouldn't work. But most people who are just there and they're learning on their own, you know, persons of Beis HaKvaros, the Vaylo Chaparein the Daf Yomi. So, you know, this is a bizayon of Leig Larosh, or worse than a bizayon, it's Leig Larosh. But Yeshiva Yaakov, so it's clear, it's crystal clear from the Rimigash that this is. So what's the raya from Chizkiyahu Melech Yehuda? He's just saying, and then he quotes that the Beis Yosef does bring in this Shimon Shim Daled Mem the words of the Ramah, and Rabbeinu Hagadol Mari Abu Kosav Aleim Shal Zeh Samchu Loim Apsukim Beveis Hakvaros you know, as a Kohen, I'm never at a Levaya, but I was there by the Levaya of my father. So they say all ganze marachas of psukim and so on, and while they're going down, and the different ma'amodas that they have, and so the Paschals of Shulchan Aruch and the Chuvas of Advaz, you know, once the Chacham Ovadia gets going, you know, it's going to be every single sefer that mentions this. They say that when he was poor, he didn't even have enough money to buy Sfarim. So he came into a Moiches Sfarim and he hat sich zu viel dorten gedreht. So the Moiches Sfarim says, either you buy or you leave. What are you doing here? So he told him he can't afford to buy Sfarim. So he memorizes the Sfarim in the store. So he didn't believe him. So he took one of the Sfarim and said, "Nu zog," and he said it mamish v'avasa. You know, it's unbelievable. Anyhow, so then there's another Inyan. The other Inyan is things that in the base, in other words, what's included and what's not included in Shmuel v'Agodah b'Beis Havel. Whatever Beis Havel is, if it's according to the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch, that means the regular Beis Havel. So he says an interesting thing. Those things that are part of the Chelik HaTfilah, of the Seder HaTfilah, you are permitted to say in Beis Havel, even though they're Divrei Torah. And even if the purpose that they're there is to learn Torah. Meaning, in other words, why do we say the Ezu Mekayman Mishnayis? Because there's a Chiyuv of Talmud Torah. And with that, you're Yosef, the Talmud Torah of Mishnah. So the Talmud Torah of Mishnah, then you have the Brisa, Rabbi Shmuel, Shloshas Midas HaTorah, the Dreshas, v'chulei, v'chulei. So that's not the Binyonei Tefillah, it's Mamish Limud HaTorah. So l'chayra, such a thing, you should, it's Ein Amir Shmuel B'Beis Havel, so according to the Rambam, and those who all like the Rambam, you should leave it out. So he says no. And he says the same thing applies to Bameh Madlikin. I was glad it didn't work out because someone else was speaking, this by Shalushudas by us, but and I wanted to mention some things about my shver, so it didn't work out. But my original Havamina was to, once in a while we learn a shtickle Zayar. So I wanted to learn the Zayar and Pashas Truma Kagavna. The Kagavna is from Pashas Truma, I think it's Daf Kuf Lamed Hey. But anyhow, didn't work out, but I was thinking to myself, ich der Litvak, ich sitz dorten und sag up den Perik bei Memadlikin, and the Chassid is saying Kagavna, Chassid the Shabbos, Yeh Shabbos. Is it any wonder that they were more matzliach with their children than we are? How could Memadlikin fight against Kagavna? It's just not shaykh. You have to be at an unbelievable madrega to think that Memadlikin don't likt mamish. I mean, it's an unbelievable perik, and there's plenty to say, and there's a lot of mefarshim. Aber wir bleiben mit der Itchen und der Neft, und sie halten bei ein paar Nehirim und Nehiru Ilah. It's tough competition. Anyhow, Bekitzer, in the Madle Madlikin, so I don't know, Kagavna could be you're allowed to say in the Beis Havel simply because nobody knows what they're talking about anyhow. Aber Lemaisa, the Bameh Madlikin, how do you say Bameh Madlikin by Beis Havel?
I don't believe it's it.
What?
I think that something down that distance.
Yeah, so Zoktel, the Yabi Oima I'm talking about, Vanilla Fizeh, Du Adin Mashanoigin Loima Bameh Madlikin Bel of Shabbos Beis Havel. He says, those are Noig that do. He says, even according to the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch, given Shekol Atam Shemispalim Beis Havel, Nasa Beikol Lil Nishmas Hanifta. It's very, very interesting. His excuse is that it's Nasa Lil Nishmas Hanifta. Because of Ramah Ba'agah, Shemitzol Espal Mokrim Shemeis Sham, Afilu Ein Sham Ovel. Right? Very famous Ramah. Keish B'Zenachas Ruach L'Neshama. Hu Alpi Divrei HaGemara. That's why a lot of people have minyonim, even when there's no zocher to say kaddish and so on and so forth. The Tshuvas HaGoyim, B'Achas Chayim, it's geht weiter, Ma'ava Yabak, Ayin Sham. V'chein kol ma shenizdal lonu b'seder HaTfilah nechshav l'kvoid HaMeis. K'moi shemizboya behedya b'machzit bocha el Chayim. So he says, the Chidah also says this word. V'ein bazeh mishum amir shmu b'veis ha'avel. V'chein noigin loima b'chol yoim tfilah shachas b'veis ha'avel perik ezu mekayim b'b'chais Rabbi Shmuel v'kayoytze bazeh. K'moi shekasavnu b'tshuva acheres b'siyata d'shmaya. So he wrote about that also. Elsewhere v'lechoshu bazeh mishum amir shmu b'veis ha'avel. V'chinami perk mamem madlikin. V'lisib selfos ochas chayim chelik beis. Yeah, b'tfilas arba shel Shabbos ein oimlim brocha mein sheva v'loi b'mem madlikin. That's what you mentioned before. I always like to quote the Orchos Chaim for the simple reason that his name was Aharon ben Yankov HaKoyen. V'loi b'mem madlikin v'achlachat filav yochlu v'yichulu v'kadosh sholem. Yeah. Yesh mekoyim shoymim hakoil. So he quotes both minhagim. V'chein leil Shabbos v'chein ikah. She'ein avelus b'Shabbos. He says because ein avelus b'Shabbos. So dorten geht ha ganze roich. What is the makor and the reason? But meanwhile, he's bringing it down that that's not a steer to Eimin or Agudah b'Beis HaAvel, because all those things that al chvay the nifter are permitted, and limud mishnayos and limud even the limud of the Chevra Shas, that it's all chvay shel nifter. And in the same way that the Yeshiva al Kivra is not a steer to Kloik LaRosh and Beis HaKvaris, so too you have all of these inyonim is not a steer to Ein Oimim Shmuah V'Agodah B'Beis HaAvel.
Which Shmuah is not a schus? Which Shmuah is not a schus?
So I'll tell you, it's an interesting thing. You're asking me a very good question. I glad it was almost coming out. I was about to say it. The people are sitting around, and they're Talmidei Chachamim. So was tut man? Wir retten lernen. The emerson is, to be very honest with you, that there were such Talmidei Chachamim that even the Ovel couldn't control himself, because it's something comes up and right away you start talking, and before you know it, you're holding in somewhere in Shoshanoga Chasapora. So that's not l'kvoida shel nifter, l'kvoida shel meis. That's done because what else? I've never done anything else but talk and learning. That's what I do. That's how I breathe. It's very hard to control yourself. It's like the rugged trouble with the haircut, or I think Chacham Ovadia said that in his Avelis that he asks mechila, but he can't control himself. So this is Pasha, the simplest answer, that not everything, not all learning, ein oimim shmuah v'agodah. The problem is, and this is the nakuda, if you or I were writing the Rambam, it's good that the Rambam wrote the Rambam, obviously, but if you or I were writing the Rambam, wouldn't we add those few words? Ein oimim shmuah v'agodah b'beis ha'ovel, ela kishehu l'chvoida shomes, or something along those lines.
It's not in the Gemara, so the Rambam doesn't say things.
Yeah, that's true. That happens to be true. As much as the Rambam wrote that he's all you need is his Sefer and Tanakh, but Lamaisa, there's a massive amount that's missing, and because the Rambam, when he quotes the Gemara literally, and he stops. You're right. So it could be that that's what it is. So it's left to us to decide whether the Rambam had in mind the possibility of such an idea. I mean, does the Rambam say anywhere else such limud haTorah that it's l'chvoida shel meis? I don't think so. The only haTorahim are Hilchos Avelis and so on and so forth, but that's not mitzad kvoida shel meis. Anyhow. Yeah. Yeah. Ein ois in the Foshas Tzadikim, Devreim Heihem Zechroinam. But that's the Shaila also, where, when, and what. Yeah. Anyhow, then he quotes v'chulei v'chulei klal ha'oila. He's coming to maskana sheyesh smach nochen l'mashanoigim loy mashmu v'agodah b'beis ha'ovel b'kama time mitritzi chodah dekayma l'olchuk divrei mekel ba'ovel v'kim l'Rab Chananya ben Gamliel cholek ha'chacham she'oisim v'aviruvda b'nafshi shlom l'chuskavosei. Of course, right there is the problem. The Rambam also knows the halacha is halacha divrei mekel ba'ovel, and certainly the Shulchan Aruch. So what went wrong? So even though he brings down like that Ma'aser Rav is better, I'm suggesting that the way they brought it is a raya that it's almost like maybe a taina against him. But I'm saying that's how they learned. The Rambam and Shulchan Aruch and Mechaber learned it like that. But he says yesh lam b'chalochas kavasei prat kaim lo Ma'aser Rav. The Sud or Ramban b'seyosei pirshu dat kan lo yitzchachom lo b'shmu v'agod v'esav b'beis meduchosh shulchachom shemeis v'loy b'sham mekaymes. The shaila is like this: when you say halacha divrei mekel ba'ovel, do you mean in the machlokes that are in the Gemara, or do you mean in the machlokes in general? So he says that even if you hold that in the Gemara, the Rambam held like this and this, but he says there are those who hold that was only Beveis Medrash Shel Chacham, that he brings from the Ramban. So, and of course that based on Maseches Machas. So if that's the case, it's also a shaila how you paskin in the Rishonim. So he says that because of Morna Beis Yosef himself, the Av b'Poskim Naktin and Halacha Deva Mekavavel, and the Chidor writes the same thing in the Birkei Yosef b'Shem Har Be'Achronim. V'chein b'Shal Shus Mishra B'Lezer. Yeah, but B'Kitzer. There's a day that says you don't say it, because he says that some places you say it only machlekes tanoim. It's a big issue, a big tumult about it, and he's very honest. But he says achlu masam hevak nesat akbelim become a place of selachah demam kabavla poiskim ayin sham v'cheid ika etc. So Bekitzer, just in that mahalach, because there's several possibilities what Emin of God means, and it might be Meis V'Dosh Chacham only. So that's a machlokes Rishonim. We could paskin like them because halacha divrei mekov aval applies even according to on the level of paskin. Yeah. And he quotes Machzik Bracha also the same thing v'chulu. Mikol mokem in zed of a bowl shematzinu shulchan gavoyed nokat amin and halacha mekov aval af neged psak moran. V'chein das had dvar Moshe v'oidachei. Okay, so he's building up on this, and then he writes Mikol shkin lefi atama achrein. Shekol shoysin l'chvoid anifter v'limnuchosei shaper domi loy mashmu v'agoda b'veis havel. Or b'frat kishoyim b'feigus sheyir le'ilu nishmas hamifter, which they generally do.
Mishnayos is that.
Yeah, Mishnayos for sure. The name Zoysis Neshama, right? And it's minig zeh harbe yoysin nochain me'elu shemaspidin ma'meis b'veis havel marbin b'shevach hameis yoyser alamida. He says better to learn than to talk about the nifter. I mean, I'll tell you the truth. I go many times. That's a Rav, So many times nichum avelim, and it's a pachad noira what people talk about. It's a pachad noira. So I mean, if there's a break between mincha and ma'ariv, and you have to wait for the shkia or b'chlal, they want to make a break, it's definitely better to learn these things than some of the things that people talk about. But fantastic, that was the minig of Soloveitchik and obviously some others that are makbid on the shita of the Rambam. Chazal kishem shenefloim min hamesim kaf nefloim min hasavdonim u'min ha'oinim achareim. That's the exaggerations of a hesped, because when a person exaggerates in a hesped, they bring these maspidim as edim when the din comes in bezin shalmala and says that look at all these things that he is, and it turns out that he isn't. And that comes out to be detrimental to him. So it's really a very big chesaron to exaggerate. Everybody knows the shita that says you have to exaggerate a little bit because most people are done, others not lekaf chus. So the kaf chayva, you think about things less of the person. So memela, if you say a little bit more, it evens itself out to the emes. Aber wie es on Zayin, he writes Geshem Shenefroim Gemara and Brachas Tav Samach Beis and Mivasav. Donu Zoya b'Yikod Chaye or b'Yikod Shichvi. Osim L'Chumit Zulim Mitzayolei. Right? You're coming to be Menachem. It's a famous Gemara that in Ksubas Av Ches. You Den Garmer that Siri B'Yer V'Chulei. V'Yirei Shamayim Yesidei Kulam B'Dei V'Haskel. Ma'toiv Loima Divrei Musa B'Amuna V'Das V'Tizal Katalim Rosi B'Sofa Buru B'Ne'ima Kadosha. The Karev Levovis Hashoyim Lavim Shebashamayim Ve'in Ketz Socha Nizaka Rabim Schus Rabim Toli Boy. So that's the tshuva of the Abiyah, and basically it boils down to this problem that they have with the minig of Kol of Klal Yisrael, basically in the Beis HaAvel, and the explicit psak of the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch. There's not too many places like that where both the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch paskin. There's no Ramah against it, and nevertheless the minig of Klal Yisrael is not like that. I just wanted to be moisif one thing. When Soloveitchik was learning Hilchos Avelus, which in general there's a whole shaila about learning Hilchos Avelus b'tzibur b'rabim. I remember when he was learning it, some people who had tinus to him that he should, it's not appropriate to learn with the Talmidim or Cotton or Hilchos Avelus. Ganze planto wegen dem, but he wasn't goyris it. But Bekitzer, there's a whole shaila. says Ovel is also leishav al gabi mito she'ena kfuya. And then it says ukshoy koife, when he's koife the mito, it's not only his mito, but all the mitos in the house. Right? Kol ha-mito shebesoich beisa hu koife. That's a Gemara on Daf Chav Zayin. Is it the Daf up to Chav Zayin yet? No. That's all the way at the end. Yeah. Anyhow, an Erev Shabbos min ha-mincha l'mala, even though he's not supposed to sit on the bed until Chashecha, but nevertheless, Mishum Kavod Shabbos, they're maschil earlier. That's what's mashal.
The Menachemim do. The Menachemim sit on mituk than standing. The Gemara says.
Yeah,
The Menachemim do.
Yeah. The Menachemim do. So this is a very interesting question. Sheila Shalom. The Ovel is also b'Sheila Shalom. What about everybody else? So that's also ganz arichos. But our minig is that we're not Sheil Shalom b'Beis Ovel. Why not? So Vaistos, there's certain halachas. Kfiyas Hamita is also like that. Koifim Kol Hamitos. So Vaistos is some sort of a halacha that the din of the Beis Ha'ovel is that there are dinim that are not necessarily totally in the Ovel himself. I'm thinking that it's possible, what's called Beis Ha'ovel? What happens if you have taka a minyan there, because that's where the nifter was, or where the nifter lived, and the Ovel somewhere else at the time. So I don't know that that's called Beis Ha'ovel, but where the Ovel is, there are dinim in the bayis, and not just in the Ovel himself. So Sheila Shalom is included, according to those who hold that you can't be Sheila Shalom to one another. Kaifim Kol Hamitos is a din in Beis Ha'ovel, and of course it could be that that's what the Rambam is talking about, if we paskin that every Beis Ha'ovel has Einayim Shmua v'Agudah, the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch, not just Beis Medrash or Shul Chacham. So it could be, I heard, I don't know if I heard it from him directly, I didn't hear it from him, but I heard that the minhag to cover the mirrors, right? It might be a minhag to cover all the mirrors in the entire house. All the mirrors in the entire house. And it could be also that when it comes to Shabbos, maybe there's also halacha that you have to uncover the mirrors. Because if it's some sort of halacha, some other idea, whatever it is, maybe it doesn't have anything to do. Shabbos also, but if it's a din in Beis Ha'ovel, so the same way that you zoykef mipnei kvod HaShabbos, maybe you should uncover the mirrors as well. I know people smoke up the mirrors with a foam of some sort, and that means you have to wash it off, and then you have to put it on again after Shabbos. I don't know if anybody does that. Maybe they do. But Amphals, this is what I wanted to say. In the now we're not noyik kfiyas hamita, but it could be that this minhag of covering the mirrors is a substitute for that in a way. You know, the mus yukna is impacted. Aber vi is only zayin, that's the machlokes Rabbi say. So it could be that it's halacha. There's a new halacha. That's what Rav Soloveitchik was insisting, that it's a Beis Ha'ovel halacha. Has nothing to do with the Isa Talmud Torah of the Ovel himself. In the Beis Ha'ovel, there shouldn't be Torah going on. And I don't remember that he explained particularly the Musar Shabbai, you know, the Inyan Shabbai. But like Shila Shalom, that there are noyig that even people who are in the Menachemim are not Shil Shalom of one another. Yeah, so there's a din of Beis Ha'ovel, and that's the Rambam Einayim Shmua b'Beis Ha'ovel. Shtikla Eichocha to that is that even though, as I mentioned at the beginning of the Shiur, that the Rambam is speaking about this halacha far removed from the Rambam that speaks about the Beis Medrash, about Beis Medrash Chacham, that they stop learning, v'chulei, but at the same time that it's also far removed from the halacha that an avil is also b'Talmud Torah. So it's like in three separate places, and in the middle there's this din of Beis Ha'ovel that Einayim Shmua v'Agudah b'Beis Ha'ovel. The Rambam doesn't tell me what Shmua v'Agudah is exactly. He doesn't tell me who's involved. Doesn't tell me if he's there, and certainly doesn't tell me that it's dafka b'Beis Medrash or Shul Chacham. It's pretty clear that the Rambam didn't learn like that. And the Rambam also doesn't explain why you don't say halacha kedivra hamekel here and Reb Chananya ben Gamliel. So this is all part and parcel of the sugya, and Bezes Hashem Yizbach, we should be zoicha, Lilos ben Achamas Tzion b'Yerushalayim. I don't know, in the old Maimed by Rav Halberstam, we used to say a little bit on Chumash. You say a little bit on Chumash also. Okay. I made an observation. It's a very interesting observation. You know that the Ramban is very, very makpid to make the point. He makes it several times. Which point? That really the Mishkan was the second Beis HaMikdash, not the first. I mean, he used Beis HaMikdash like Vasili Mikdash or Shachanti B'Sayich. What was the first? Maimer HaSinai. Very makpid. And he repeats it over and over, and he's madgish it, and it's Akdama to Truma, he says the same thing again clearly. And he says even that the Eish that was by Har Sinai is why the gold of the Kruvim, because the gold is doima to the Eish. So it's a Moiridik Kazach. And he says the whole mahalach of the Hashwas Hashchina B'Tachtoinim has begun at Maimer HaSinai, and then HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted to make it permanent. Because B'Mshech HaYovel Hema Yalu V'Har, that Malkum means nothing. But then he wants to be Masher Shchinasai B'Seich B'nai Yisrael, and of course the Ma'isa Egel, Malach Li Shalech L'Necha, and Moshe Rabbeinu pleaded. Anyhow, Begitzun to Shishura is, there's a medrash that says that when they heard that they're still able to build a Mishkan, they ran from Moshe in the middle of a sentence to go collect the gold and the silver to build a Mishkan. That's how excited they were that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is masking even now to be Masher Shchinasai. But I had a ha'ara on the whole thing. That it's a Meiridik Gezach that it starts by Kabbalas HaTorah and continues in the Mishkan, which the Ramban points out that the Dibur goes out Mibein Shnei HaKruvim to Moshe Rabbeinu, so that's Torah, and the Lishkas HaGozis of the Beis HaMikdash. There's a tremendous connection of Torah with the Shechina and the Hashras HaShechina. And of course, there's a tefillah that Reb Chia said at the end of his Shemona Esrei, that's mentioned in the Gemara Maseches Brachos. You got something, v'chulei v'chulei, v'avinu shebashamayim, shetei teirascha u'manuseinu b'olam hazeh, v'al yidve libeinu v'al yachshachu eineinu. The Marshal already points out, al yidve libeinu v'al yachshachu eineinu, which you don't really need the Marshal for that, is a paraphrase of a pasuk at the end of Megillas Eicha. Al zeh ha'yadav libeinu al eilecha shchu eineinu. Al hatzion sheshamim shu'olim hilchuvay. So, what's he saying? He's saying shetei teirascha u'manuseinu, even bisman hazeh, when there's no Beis HaMikdash Kayim, which would normally lead al zeh ha'yadav libeinu al eilecha shchu eineinu. But if you're learning Torah, Yom and Balayla, Torasa Yumanusai, then you don't have that problem. Why? Because Minayin Shafil Echad Shiyoshev V'Isek B'Torah Shashchina Imay Shenema B'Chol HaMokim Asher Askir Shmi Avay Elecha V'Erachticha. So the Avay Elecha, the Hashras Hashchina comes, and some the Kairos to say HaKadosh Baruch Hu becomes your Chavrusa. You don't have a Chavrusa, it becomes the third party, and Minayin Shafil Echad Yoshev Hashchina Imay. So Memel, if the Shechina is there, then it's Al Yid V'Libeinu V'Al Yachshachu Eineinu. If the Chesaron, why it's Al Zeh Hayadav V'Libeinu, is Al Hatzion Sheshamim Shu'alim Hilchuvay. So I wanted to suggest that really any time there's a total connection of Ashras Hashchina with Limud HaTorah all the way back to Maimer HaSinai. Me'idach Gisa, it's a fascinating thing. You open up Sefer Malachim, Malachim Aleph, they call it, Perek Ches, I think it's Perek Ches. And all of a sudden you have this tefillah, this whole tefillah, long arichus of Shlomo HaMelech. And he doesn't talk about, you open up a Rambam, Hilchus Beis HaBchira, right? So mitzvah to say livless Beis HaBchira, he happens to quote the pasuk of Asali Mikdash Shachanti V'Soicham, not L'Shichnei Siglu Shuv Asashama, but he quotes the pasuk and he says that the mitzvah is to make a Beis HaMikdash, right? Lahakriv karbanos u'choyge gemelov shalosh pa'amim b'shana. When Shlomo HaMelech speaks about what this binyan that he just built is all about, there's only one thing that he talks about, and that's tefillah. Very interesting. Nish toiga, nish karbonis, nish aliyah l'regel, just tefillah. And he has a ganze marocha about what the inyan is of davening. And towards the end, he says a meridike zach, which I think we don't fully appreciate, the halacha. There's a halacha, the Rambam brings it, Shulchan Aruch brings it, the minhag of all of Klal Yisrael, tel talpiyos, tel shakol piyos, poinim elov, that there's a halacha when we daven Shmona Esrei, mechuyev to face here Mizrach, but wherever you are, face towards the Mikdash. And when you're in Shalayim, you face the Beis HaMikdash, the Mikdash Hadoshim, and so on and so forth. So some people face Mizrach, some people have to face Ma'ariv, some people face the Safim, some people face Dara. Aber wie es soll nicht sein, there's such a halacha. Was liegt in jener halacha? So the Psukim in Malachim and the Tefillah of Shlomo HaMelech says something amazing. He says, when Bnei Yisrael are choitei, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants to punish them, and he sends them into Golus, and they do tshuva. So where are they? They're in Sibir, they're in Brazil. It doesn't matter where they are. But they're not in Eretz Yisrael, they're not in Yerushalayim, and there is no Beis HaMikdash. Because that's the whole point, that they're in Golus. So there's no Beis HaMikdash. Yeshualim hilchu bai. And from deswegen he says, when they daven to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, they daven derech Eretz Yisrael, derech ha'ir hazois, and derech ha'mokem hazeh. I pointed out it's like our tefillahs are like guided missiles. That there's a program in the tefillah that it goes our posture is that we face. I had a thought that no matter where we face, there's a whole shaila, by the way. There are many batei midrashos that, for whatever technical reason, they can't build so that the Aron Kodesh is in the Mizrach Vant. So there's all machlokas about how to deal with that. We had in the Beis Medrash of Yitzchak Kahn on this problem, and some people refused to daven there because of this suffix. But there were 3 different minhagim b'vas achas. There was some like a real license guy to do. The 3 different minhagim b'vas achas. Some faced Mizrach, regardless. That particular Aron Kodesh was facing Tzafim. So some faced Mizrach, which means, of course, that they were turning to the right. And some faced the Aron, which means they were turning to the north. And some made a pshara, they went on an angle between Tzafin and Mizrach. So, like kind of lotzis lidei shneim, or not to be yaitza either one. I don't know which way it works, but l'maisa, that's what they did. So I know some refused to daven over there for that reason. But let's assume that there's such a Beis Medrash, such a makom. Or let's assume you're at a chasna hall, and somebody once asked me, where's the Mizrach Vant in that particular hall? So I said, I really don't know. So he said, how could you not know? You're here every night. So I told him, I'm also in every other chasna hall every night. Without a tumult. You don't know where it is. So everyone knows you have to be mechaven. Your heart has to be mechaven. So that's also a guided missile. And also what I'm saying is it's not that you're facing Mizrach for us. You're facing Mizrach, and only because you're facing Mizrach, that's why the tefillah has a kivun l'Yerushalayim. It's a din in the tefillah. There's a concept of the tefillah to HaKadosh Baruch Hu that it has to be connected to the eretz, to the ear, and to the makom of the mikdash. And that's even when the mikdash is charev, which is peladik. So we learn from this a meridika daher that when the Beis HaMikdash is charev, if it comes to hashras hashchina to you, then the din is that it comes to you b'chol hamokom asher askei shmi. It's and even if you come to Yerushalayim, you can't go in. We can't even have a whole plunter. What is so? But when it comes to tefillah, the tefillah requires makom hamikdash. That it exists. It requires a makom hamikdash, and the tefillah goes. I'm not masbir anything. I'm just telling you the mitzias hadvar. The mitzias hadvar is that the Shlomo HaMelech b'shaitoi, he doesn't talk about anything but our relationship to HaKadosh Baruch Hu through tefillah, and he says that the tefillah is makom hazeh, and it's makom hazeh even when the Beis HaMikdash is charev. As a Hashem Yisbarach, we should be zoicha, say mitzad moed cotton, and say mitzad the parsha of Asali Migdash Shachanti B'Soichom. You should talk B'Zoicha to be as Goel Tzedek B'Mheira V'Yameinu.
Amen.